Welcome to Outside Ourselves. I am your host, Kelsi Climbera. I'm so excited to be back with you all for full-length interviews. I took a break this summer and did a little series called Summer Break. Make sure to check that out if you haven't already. But this is my first interview back for the fall, and I'm so excited to bring this conversation to you today. Today's conversation is with author Brittany Lee Allen, who has written this amazing book entitled Lost Gifts, Miscarriage, Grief, and the God of All Comfort. And that book title is a very accurate description for today's conversation. We talk a little bit about Brittany's experience with reoccurring miscarriages. I share a little bit about my own miscarriage, and we talk through what the grief of that looks like, how oftentimes the church and the world mishandle miscarriage in ways that are meant, I think, to comfort, but ultimately end up glossing over the suffering and the sadness and the grief of losing the life of a child. I think this is a really helpful conversation for anyone who has gone through miscarriage and feels alone or feels like they don't know where to go with their grief. I think it's also a great conversation to listen to if you know someone who's been through miscarriage and you don't know what to say or what to do. Brittany reminds us and encourages us that we don't have to have all the right words, but being there and acknowledging the life of a child lost is a good place to start. And of course, to remember for all of us that no matter our suffering, however terrible it is, God is still with us. Jesus still died on the cross for us. He still loves us very much, and he weeps with those who weep. Our hope is in him. We can trust in his good promises, which we don't always see, but we know are there for us all the same. With that, here is our conversation. Brittany, thank you so much for joining me today on Outside Ourselves. I've been really looking forward to this conversation and to getting to know you a little bit. So thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself as we get started, and then a little bit about your new book, which I believe is already out. Is that correct?
Yes, it's been out for a couple
Awesome.
weeks. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, tell us about Lost Gifts after you give us your own personal spiel.
I'm Brittany Allen, and I am a mom. Obviously, I have two boys and also multiple babies lost through miscarriage in heaven. And I'm a wife, and we're about to celebrate our 12-year anniversary, which is really fun.
Congrats.
Thank you. Um, and I'm an author. I actually have my first book, which we'll get into, and then my second book comes out next year in April that I'm really
Oh,
excited about
awesome.
too. Yeah, so that's who I am.
Awesome. Have you always been, before we dive into the book, have you always been a writer? Is that something you've always kind of wanted to do, or is that a newer thing?
I've been a writer for about 12 years now, but it was not something that I thought I was gonna be.
Hmm.
It was something that God really I think peeled the layers back and revealed was actually there in my heart um, after becoming a believer. So I think, yeah, I actually was like the worst student in school. Like, I hated reading. I didn't read a single one of the books I was supposed to. Um, I hated writing. And so it doesn't make sense that I'm an author now, but I love it so much. And I'm really excited and feel grateful that I can do it.
Well, that's awesome, and you're a very talented writer. So
Oh, thank you.
amazing that that's something that you found and really enjoy is definitely a gift. Well, tell us a little bit about Lost Gifts, the book in general, and then a little bit about why you felt the need to write it.
Yeah. So Lost Gifts is um, kind of it's almost like a memoir, but also meant for encouragement for those who are walking through miscarriage. So yeah, it basically goes through 12 gifts that I believe the Lord kind of gave me in the midst of the grief and loss of the gift of a baby.
Mm.
And so I experienced recurrent miscarriage before my boys. And so it's really shares a lot of that journey and is hopefully very comforting while also being honest about the hard parts about
Mm-hmm.
miscarriage and also offering hope. Yeah, I don't know. It's like my heart in a book. My heart as I was going through those miscarriages in a book. And I wrote it because I felt like there are some more resources out there on miscarriage now, and
Sure.
I'm very thankful for that.
Mm-hmm.
And some really good ones. I think I wanted to also offer the perspective for women who are going through recurrent loss.
Mm.
And so it's not specific to that, but if a woman who is going through that would pick up the book, they would feel especially seen because they know what that's like. And not that losing one baby is like better or anything. Losing any baby is tragic. But I especially just wanted those women to feel seen because it is more rare.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like you handle the grief and suffering of miscarriage so well, while also pointing to this hope. You kind of hold both of those things in tension and don't gloss over either of them. So I really appreciated that. And you, at the beginning, you compare miscarriage to walking through a season of, I think you say, storms and rain. So can you talk to us a little bit about why you found that to be an apt metaphor for that season of life for you?
Yeah, I think that really speaks specifically to recurrent loss
Right. Yeah.
because it would feel like there was this torrential, horrible storm each time there was a miscarriage.
Mm.
And then in the middle of it, like in between and the months after, um, there was just this constant grief that I was carrying
Yeah.
of just missing these babies that I never got to hold or kiss or know, or I don't know if they're boys or girls, like just that,
Mm.
all of those griefs that we carry with us. Because I think a lot of us, as soon as we become pregnant, I mean, we're just like, who is this little person?
Right.
Like, is it going to be a boy? Is it going to be a girl? And you just have all these like questions, and then you are left with never getting to answer those questions. And you've already envisioned your life with those babies, and then when they're gone, there's that grief that remains. So
Mm.
that's kind of like what the steady rain was. And then as soon as another one would come, it felt like just another massive storm.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense. I hope this is an encouragement to you. My first pregnancy, I miscarried. I didn't have recurring miscarriages, but I did lose one baby. And so when I heard that, I thought of the storms and rain in terms of kind of this ongoing grief that you're dealing with. And then a downpour being just something that brings that
Yeah.
grief back to the surface, whether it's a holiday, Mother's Day, or seeing, a friend have a baby, which is such a joyous thing. And, we can talk about, as you do in your book too, that you can be joyful, but also sad at the same time about that. So I think that it is a metaphor that works for anyone who's experienced any type of miscarriage, for sure.
Yeah, I'm so glad you felt that way.
Yeah. You also, I found your first chapter really interesting, and I really enjoyed it. You kind of give a little bit of history to how our modern views of miscarriage have formed, or how people have throughout history kind of viewed miscarriage. I'm curious why you felt that was important to include in the book.
Yeah, that chapter was so difficult because it feels kind of different than the rest of the book. And so I went back and forth on this with my editor. She was like on board from the beginning, but I just was like, I hope I don't lose readers from the very first chapter because it's just a lot of research. And I actually had to take a lot out so that I wouldn't lose the reader. But I think it's important because of the culture we live in, where abortion is just like praised, and
Yeah.
it's almost like it's like our worship of Baal, or however you say that, like, you know, and I think that a lot of women feel, well, okay, so to take a step back, I feel like that has infiltrated the church too, and you see that in our, like, even though we're pro-life, at least most churches are, most solid churches. Okay, all solid churches.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You're good. Yeah.
I feel like we have adopted the language of the world in our response to miscarriage. And so, and I mean, we can get into that at some point too, but just the things that are said to women who are miscarrying from people in the church really kind of reveal that, like, maybe they're not as pro-life as they claim to be, or are not wording things according to their thoughts on that,
Sure.
because they're just kind of saying whatever is said to women,
Yeah.
culturally. And so I really wanted to start at a place of like telling women, like, no, like, you lost a baby, and this
Yeah.
is a worthy grief, and this is also like a gift. Like, we were able to carry our babies for a short time, and that is a gift, and we can rejoice in their lives, and that God created a little image bearer, and who has value, from the moment they're conceived. And we can rejoice in that. And that also means that you are free to grieve over your baby when the world says it's just a clump of cells, or, it's not a person yet. So I really felt like it was important to start there.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about the way that you talked about it is you are from the get-go trying to kind of stop any misunderstandings of what a baby is, who a baby is. And so then you can then the rest of the book move into this conversation of how to grieve well, what suffering looks like, and the gifts that come as a result of our suffering. So I thought that was really, really informative and helpful. And I think at the end of that chapter, you mention there, and then I think in another place, kind of some of the harmful things that can be said to people who have experienced miscarriage. And I think, in my experience, it seemed like a lot of times those words were they were supposed to be a comfort. People meant them as like a comfort, but they didn't, because they are a lot of times undervaluing the life of that child. It ends up, like you say in the book so well, it ends up making you feel like you can't grieve your child's life, and that you should just gloss it over. So can you kind of walk us through some of those things that you feel like are said, that are often maybe meant to, that people mean them well, but they end up being more harmful because they kind of just gloss over, or are meant to make you feel like it's okay, you can try again, or whatever. That's obviously one of them.
Yeah. And I also just want to say, like, I did this. Like, in my mind, I don't think I responded this way before I had miscarriages, like, said the things, but in my mind, I remember a friend miscarrying, and she lost 2 babies in a row before she had kids, that were living. And I remember thinking, like, oh, that's sad, but like kind of relating to it, like she lost a dream. instead of like an actual baby, you know?
Yeah.
And that, when I went through it myself, I was just so convicted, like, oh my word, like I was not nearly as pro-life in
Mm.
my heart, truly, as I claimed to be. And it just was really revealing to me. So I want to say that just
Yeah.
in case somebody's listening and they're like, oh, I've said some of these things, like there's grace and
Yeah.
forgiveness for you. And
Absolutely.
like, but we can also grow and do better. And so, I think some of them are like, you'll have another baby. That said a lot, which just, it's like babies don't replace babies. Like
Right.
if you lost, your 2-year-old, people wouldn't come up to you and be like, you can have another kid, So we
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't say that either about the unborn. And then, things like at least it was early is very common.
Right.
Which, like you said, the intent there is like, people are glad that the woman doesn't have to go through like full labor and like, maybe they feel like maybe she'll get more attached and then lose the baby. And like, so like it's coming from a place of like hoping that they've been spared grief,
Mm-hmm.
but
Right.
by losing a baby earlier, but there's still just so much grief no matter what
Right.
when you lose a baby.
Yeah.
And that really just, it's almost like saying like, you know, your baby isn't really like worthy of grief,
Yeah. Yeah.
it just, like you said, it
And
devalues.
even like you don't need to be too sad
Yeah,
because you didn't go through too much or something like that.
right. And it
Yeah.
also pits moms who have lost, like who have experienced stillbirth against moms who have
Right.
experienced miscarriage.
Yeah.
And so then women who have miscarried often feel like I'm not allowed to grieve like
Mm.
a woman who has lost a baby later. And it just is not good for anyone,
Yeah.
to pit those two against each other. And people do that with infertility too. Um, I remember just hearing a lot like, at least you can get pregnant, and
Right.
think of
Yeah.
so and so who's, experiencing infertility, like, and so yeah, all of these comments though are very much devaluing, undervaluing the life of the baby, and
Mm.
in doing so make you feel, like you said, that you can't openly grieve
Mm-hmm.
your baby.
Mm-hmm. I want to get into like, good things to say or do maybe in a little bit, but I also found your discussion of how the world makes the distinction between being human and personhood. And obviously that goes into abortion and arguments for to be pro-choice. And then your response to that based on Psalm 139, really, really helpful. Can you walk us through just a little bit of that and maybe specifically kind of what you found in Psalm 139 to be really helpful to that distinction that the world tends to make?
Yeah, so Psalm 139 is, it shows that God has, determined our days
Mm.
before, we were even like, before he even began knitting us together in our mother's womb. And um the world says that we become a person when we go through the magical transition from womb to earth, and that is not what God's word says. It
Yeah.
says that we, like, he knew us, the person, not just the human, before we were even born. And so,
Mm.
but also, like, one thing that is interesting, and I'm not going to be able to remember the actual words off the top of my head, but I remember researching for my book, and I don't think it ended up in the book, but the original language, when you look at stillbirth, or miscarriage in scripture,
Mm.
it's interchangeable. Like,
Hmm.
you can use them for both. And I found that interesting because it's like God sees the baby lost at 5 weeks and the baby lost at 39 weeks, and like their value is the same.
Yeah.
And so we can grieve because we've lost a child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I think that, yeah, there's so much comfort to hearing that God not only knitted us together, and I think that's the part that most people tend to focus on in Psalm 139, which is beautiful, but that he knew us. He knew who we were going to be before, like you said, that even happens. That's such a comfort, not only for those going through miscarriage, but I think also, for us right now, like
Yeah.
when we're struggling to know who we are, the fact that God sees us wholly and completely from beginning to end, like not only wherever we are, but like in whatever stage we are through our lives, I think is pretty incredible and amazing for the believer.
Yeah.
That's great. When I miscarried, I think the hardest question for me was why, and I really wrestled with that question for a long time. And I know you write a little bit about this. What have you found to be a comfort for yourself and for other women who are going through miscarriage when that question comes up?
Yeah, I have one. I think it's The Gift of Lament is one of the chapters, and I talk about this because I remember after, I can't remember if it was after my second or third miscarriage, but I remember just saying, like, Lord, why do you keep taking our babies? And just feeling just such immense grief. And I think, like you said, like even losing one baby, you have that question, like, because it feels so, it is so wrong, because of the fall. Like, this isn't how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Babies are supposed to live. And so I think, what did I find a comfort? I think really just leaning into the truth that he weeps with me. Like, he weeps with us over the loss of a baby and any other grief and suffering we face. And he weeps or grieves all that is wrong in this world, all the effects of sin. And I wonder, probably more deeply than we do, because of how good he is. And I think that was what I found to be most comforting, was that he wasn't just looking down and saying, like, why can't you just trust that this is for your good?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
like that's true for sure. But that's not how that's not how Jesus relates to people in scripture. Like, he is, he leans down and weeps with them. I think about Lazarus and that whole story, and how he took the time, like he knew that what the result was going to be. He knew he was going to raise Lazarus, and yet he took the time to grieve with those who were around, and like with his sisters, and with Lazarus's sisters. So I think that was a really great comfort for me.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I think just like to share kind of for me, I think that question of why is so hard, because you just want an answer, I think, or I did at least. I think, and I often want an answer to the question of why in all areas of life. But I think trusting and knowing that God doesn't always give us a why, but he gives us a where and a who.
Yes.
And knowing that our babies are with Jesus, like they're in his arms, is and so we know where they are, we know who they are, and that place is so amazing and so incredible, is a really huge comfort. And sometimes I know when I thought about that, especially early on, it was a comfort, but I also hated it because it meant that they weren't with me. So I think it's okay to acknowledge that, but
right.
Overall, trusting in that and hearing that over and over again, I did find to be quite a source of comfort. And then, like you're saying too, the flip side of that is that Jesus is also with you. He's also with you, grieving with you, weeping with you, and is not going to leave your side either, which is mind-boggling, doesn't make sense, but so
Right.
immensely comforting.
Yeah. And we can go to him, and it's healthy to run to him and lament to him and ask him these hard questions. That's where we're supposed to go with our why. So
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Can you unpack some of the misguided theology behind, you use this term suffering well, which is a term that is often used in churches and in Christianity, specifically as that phrase relates to miscarriage. Can you kind of talk about the harmful ways that we can think about that, and then maybe in response, a good way to think about suffering in terms of miscarriage?
yeah. So I think being in reformed circles can have its downsides when you're suffering. But well, and I mean, we could get into the flip side of like prosperity gospel teachers and, like, well, your
Sure.
baby wouldn't die if you just had enough faith kind of stuff.
Sure.
So I don't want to just pick on my own my own people, but I I was going through this in a context that was not healthy. Did not have a healthy, even though it was a reformed church, did not have a healthy view of suffering. And very much the focus was just on like suffering well, which meant kind of always being very joyful, like rejoice always was like always like pounded into our minds. And even there was preaching from the pulpit talking about how when you're downcast, you are sinning. So that's the context that I was suffering in. And I think I share a little bit of that story in one of the chapters too. And so I think sometimes when we're harping on suffering well, it can make people feel like they cannot suffer openly.
Yeah.
They cannot
Yeah.
grieve. We have to always be happy and not show our tears. And people feel very judged by their tears and their grief. And suffering well, I think more scripturally looks like weeping and grieving weeping over and grieving what God grieves.
Absolutely.
And then also having our joy intact, because our joy is our joy of our salvation. And so that can never be stolen from us. So I think learning to hold, like suffering well is like learning to hold grief and joy together and know that they can be intertwined. And there should be room for grief. So I don't know if that fully answered your question, but
no, I think that's I think it's an interesting thing to think about, that often happens where you're suddenly turning suffering, which the Bible speaks about happening to you in almost like a passive way. A lot of time it's not like the Bible never says like to actively go out and search for suffering. But does promise that we will suffer. And I think when you start to talk about it in the terms you're talking about, it becomes almost this active thing in the sense of like, how can I like turn whatever is happening to me into something really positive? And if I don't, then it means X, Y, and Z for my salvation or whatever. I actually, this is a little bit of a different problem, but maybe I touched on it somewhat. I'm Lutheran. And so I think where this goes wrong for us is we talk a lot about the theology of the cross and Christ suffering for us on the cross. But what can happen is that suffering can become glorified so much in that then it becomes a thing to kind of seek out. And the only way you know you're saved is by your own suffering rather than by Christ's suffering. So it becomes a thing. We would say it's like a reverse theology of glory, where you're trying to find your glory or your worth or your salvation even in the way that you suffer. And you kind of like compare how much you've suffered to other people.
Oh,
And if
man.
you've suffered more, then that's a good thing.
I
So
think I've seen that too, like
yeah,
even in my context. Yeah.
yes, yeah. So I feel like, yeah, it is hard. I think this can go wrong in all sorts of ways, but I love your reminder that we just let suffering be suffering. Like, and that doesn't mean, I think you actually say in the book, don't turn trials into lessons, which I love, because I think
Yeah.
that that's something that American Christians have a really hard time not doing. We want to see the silver lining. We want to grow from suffering and say, like, this is why, like, this happened and this came out of it. And I think that obviously sometimes God reveals good that comes from suffering or from bad, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And a
Yeah.
lot of times it doesn't happen like in the timeline that we
Right.
want. So we're
And sometimes, sorry,
no, go ahead.
I mean to
Go.
cut you off.
Yeah.
Sometimes, sorry, this is like getting into my second book, so I'm like
Do
excited.
it.
I have a lesson. I have a chapter in my second book about this, kind of seeking a lesson kind of thing that we do, and how it can actually rob us of really seeing what God's doing, like in like just in his comfort. And it can rob us of our communion with him, because we're like, not now, Lord. I'm trying to find out what you're trying to teach me.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that it's fine to like look back and be like, yes, like God grew me in this way, and like I saw, I learned this. Like that's
Sure.
wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so thankful that we have those moments. But when we are pushing people in the middle of their grief or their suffering to like, and we're saying to them, God is teaching you something through this. And
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, it just it causes us to fix our eyes on a lesson or like what we're learning, instead of fixing our eyes on Christ and our suffering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, it actually turns our gaze back inward to ourselves and how we can change things or how we can be in control, rather than resting in the fact that life is hard. we're grieving, we're suffering, and yet Christ is still good and he's still here for us. And that's all we need. I mean, that is, at the end of the day, that's the gospel. Like, that's it. So it's actually, I think, turns us back in on ourselves in a way that's really, really dangerous. You also write a little bit about how miscarriage can create or amplify a woman's fear of the future. And I think this is something to touch on, just because it's a thing that if you haven't been through miscarriage, you might not understand fully. Can you talk a little bit about that fear, and then how you found ultimately, eventually, kind of found peace despite that fear?
Yeah, I think if you've experienced a miscarriage, you know what it's like when you get pregnant again. It is just like a daily battle. I remember just like every time I would go to the bathroom, I would pray like, please, Lord, don't let me see blood. Like every time.
Yeah.
And it just, it's really hard. It really amplifies our lack of control. And, yeah, but that also causes us to lean into him. One thing I've learned is I don't think that our fears necessarily always fall off our backs just because we're trusting in the Lord.
Yeah.
I think it's almost like that joy and grief intertwining. Like I think that we're complicated as humans, and so we can trust in the Lord and still also be like scared. And yet still trusting that his his ways are good and he's with us, and, that he promises to be with us. I always think of Glenna Marshall's book, The Promise is His Presence. I don't know if you've read that, but it's
I
really good.
haven't.
But it's like, yeah, he promises to be with us. And I think that brings a lot of peace, even despite the very real fears. Like in that chapter, I talk about, I think I opened it up with the story of like, telling my husband, like, I'm just so afraid that I'm going to have more miscarriages. And that did come true. I had another miscarriage. And actually since then I've had another. And so like that, my fear came true, but I was able to trust that even if that happened, the Lord was going to be with me. He was going to carry me through it. He was going to sustain my faith. And that is where I was able to find peace despite the fear.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a hard thing to do, and a hard thing to, how would you handle like talking about that with someone who's like right in the midst of fear? Because I think, I don't know, my mind goes there where I know that fear a little bit myself, and even hearing that in the midst of that can feel not like comfort. And that doesn't mean that it's not just because you feel a certain way. But how would you kind of handle that for someone else who's kind of navigating that fear?
Yeah, it's so
And there might not
hard.
be a right answer.
I know, because like it is scary.
Yeah.
And I guess I also just wouldn't want them to feel shame for being afraid, because I think that was another thing that I felt was like that I wasn't allowed to be afraid. And I think when there's like trauma involved, like no matter like how, like whether or not you had like not tragic, but like super traumatic, like you're in the hospital, like, you know what I mean?
I think it's okay to, I don't think that you're at all like belittling any of them. There's different experiences.
Just different experiences.
Yeah.
And regardless of what your experience is, like there is still trauma there, like the next time that you get pregnant. And I think we can't, I think we need to have, I mean, this is said all the time, but like have grace for ourselves, the fact that we're human and we're going to experience fear in these very real situations. So I don't know that that is necessarily comforting, because I think what we want most, what I wanted most, was for God to come down and say, you won't miscarry anymore. But that wasn't reality. And we really do. We just have to cast our fears on him and just ask him to carry us through them.
Yeah. And I think like you're saying, which you've already said beautifully and really thoroughly, but letting that fear be fear is okay.
Yeah.
And not pushing ourselves or others to promises that he hasn't given us. Because I think, I can think of one instance where I was with a group of girls. Some of them I knew really well and some I didn't. And one girl was experiencing infertility, and this girl, very well-intentioned in the group, was saying like, well, you're going to have a baby. That's what she told her. And after that, we were all kind of going home, and I was with my friend who had been told that, and she just started crying. I mean, it was terrible. And, again, that girl meant the best, but she's giving her a promise that we all know is not certain, unfortunately. And I think in that instance, what should have been done was just saying, I'm so sorry you're going through this. This is terrible. And there's a lot of fear and there's a lot of sadness, and we're here with you in it.
Yes.
And then if it makes sense, God is good, as, know that God is good as well. But I think it's hard. It's hard for us because we want everything to be good. We don't want to see people suffer. So we so easily jump to the end without really letting people sit in suffering, and sitting with them, I think, is important too.
Right. And I think of how God gave us Psalms where there isn't a tidy ending.
Yes.
And I also think about like some of the Psalms, like I remember somebody going to Psalm 13 to encourage me and saying like focus, like harping on the end where he kind of resolves to like rejoice in the Lord. I forget the exact quote of the psalm, but I kind of thought to myself, like, I wonder how long it took him to get there, though. Like, did he write that psalm in one sitting? Did he, you know what I mean? Because it's not always, he could have written that at the end, like when he finally came to that resolution after, you know, days or however long he struggled, you know?
Right.
And so we have to let people grieve these losses. Infertility is a grief. Like,
yes. Yeah.
And we have to allow these, but you're right. Like we always want to jump and like, I think sometimes that's our discomfort too.
Yeah, I do
Like
too.
with
I totally think.
like with others suffering, like, and yeah, as Americans, we don't like to suffer. So, and we're not used to it. Like we're not like seeing people die every day.
Right. Death is pretty removed for most of us, I would say. Yeah.
Right. And so we are just very like adverse to suffering. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. You write some about how before you had miscarriages, you'd never really thought about Jesus as the good shepherd, but how that picture of Jesus was really helpful for you after. Can you talk a little bit? And I know you've probably touched on some of these things already, but a little bit about why that picture of Jesus throughout Scripture was so helpful for you.
Yeah, I think it is, I'm like a broken record, but just his nearness, like, yeah. And also there were times where I can remember just calling out for comfort and feeling like he wasn't there and feeling completely abandoned in my grief. And thankfully it wasn't the whole time, but there were just certain instances. But now I look back on those and I see that he was sustaining me. Like those are moments I can point back to now and think it wasn't me clinging to Christ. It was my good shepherd was clinging to me and carrying me through this. And so I think just like how it says in Isaiah that he like carries us in his bosom and like gently leads those who are with young. Like I think that that's true for women who are losing babies too. Like it's not just true for the mom with the littles, like it's true for all of us. And he also leads us gently. Like I think in the book I break down like all the different aspects of his shepherding, and it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like he's not just dragging us down this road of grief, like he's carrying us through it and cares about how we're feeling, and isn't just trying to get us to get over it like most people in our lives want us to do. Yeah, so I think that was just a picture that really became real to me.
Yeah, I love that. I think I love that idea of meditating on that and that picture of Jesus and grief and suffering, because I even think too of the fact like he can handle our anger during that time as well. Like he can handle us being bad sheep, and which I think all sheep are kind of bad and stupid if you really think about it. But he can handle us going astray or lamenting and being really angry with him. Like that's actually, as a good shepherd, that's his job. And he finds joy in that. So I think that that's also something that is helpful to remember, is you can feel your feelings fully, whether they're anger or sadness or grief. He's totally okay with that.
Right. Yeah.
We talked briefly about some of the harmful things that are sometimes said during miscarriage, but I do want to leave people encouraged. on top of the fact that they're forgiven if they've ever said those things, what are things that people said or did for you during your season of miscarriage, during your miscarriages, that you found helpful and comforting?
Yeah. I feel like I had a lot of bad experiences, so the good ones are not as common. But there was one woman in particular in my church who I actually didn't know very well, and I didn't know her story at all. And she texted me after I lost my first baby, like the next day, and was like, "Can I come, like, talk with you?" And I was like, "Sure." And she came and she sat with me and she listened to my story, and everything I was feeling, all the things. And I'm like one of those people that'll just like tell you anything. I'm feeling like I barely knew her, and I was like, "Here's my whole grief story." But she shared with me that she had experienced a stillbirth at like right at 20 weeks. The baby had died at like 18 weeks, I think, and she found out at 20, and then she experienced a miscarriage after that. And she just, because she had been through it and understood, she really did just give me room to grieve. And she just sat with me and she literally wept with me. And that was just a lifeline. Like her friendship was a lifeline for me. She came as an acquaintance and she left like as like one of my best friends. Like it just our relationship really, really grew from that. And she mentored me through all of that and even after. And so that was one good experience. I think just to talk about like what we can say, we can almost always come back to just saying, "I'm so sorry for the loss of your baby."
Yeah.
Like that's what it is. And let's just say what it is and acknowledge that. And so any of those like that we're tempted to say, "You'll have another baby. At least it was early. At least you can get pregnant." Just replace those with, "I'm so sorry for the loss of your baby."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I don't remember. I mean, I know a lot of people came up to me and said they were sorry for sure. But another thing I thought about was like on Mother's Day, it was, I had lost 2 babies by the time I found out I was pregnant on Mother's Day. And then the next Mother's Day, I had lost 2 babies by then. And I went to church, and thankfully my church was not one that like did like these big, huge Mother's Day things. But I fully expected it to just be kind of forgotten. And a gal that was not a super close friend, but like in my friend group came up and she gave me flowers and was like, "You are a mom."
Oh,
yeah.
That's so beautiful.
I know. And those are, that's another thing we can do is acknowledge our friends on Mother's Day who are grieving.
Yeah. I think, just to add one thing to that, I think remembering or doing our best to remember and be there, not just in like the moment in the week of miscarriage, but like checking in later.
Yeah.
That always meant so much to me, is if I saw someone, a few months later and they asked and they acknowledged it. Like that always, I feel like sometimes people are scared to bring it up that much later.
Right.
And I don't know, I would just encourage people that it's never a bad time to say the words like, "I'm so sorry," and say, or at least like, "How are you doing?"
Yeah.
And just kind of check in. I feel like that's always appreciated. Even if the person doesn't want to talk about it, they can say that and acknowledge it. But
right.
That always meant a lot for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, I want to leave people with maybe kind of just what you would say is like one thing. If someone's listening right now who's going through miscarriage, reoccurring or not, what is the one thing that you hope that they hear or you would want to leave them with?
I think I'm going to do two. I'm going to be a rebel.
That's great.
A rebel.
Do it.
I think I would want them both to know that Jesus weeps with them and they're free to weep, which is the name of my second book, by the way. And that he's also the greatest treasure. I think when you're going through a miscarriage, it can just feel like God is taking from you.
Yeah.
And yet we have a treasure in Christ who can never be taken from us. And I think what I learned through this was to treasure Christ above all things. And I'm not saying that women aren't doing that who are listening. Because I think often you hear like things said to women who are either going through infertility or like miscarriage. And they're like, once you stop idolizing a baby, then God will give you one. So I want to be clear that that is not what I mean. But I think in him meeting me in my suffering, I learned that he was the greatest treasure. And so I would just want them, my biggest takeaway was just that they would know that he really is worth everything we go through in this life. And one day we'll be home with our greatest treasure. And that he's weeping with them.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, Brittany, thank you so much. This has been so comforting, and I think it's going to be a really helpful listen for women, for couples who are going through miscarriage. And I know your book is such a great resource as well. So I'm so thankful that it's out there and available for people. So thank you for the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Outside Ourselves is a 1517 podcast and show. To learn more about all of our shows and all of our podcasts, please go to 1517.org/podcast. I just want to say really quickly, as the online content editor over at 1517, the online articles this past summer have been really incredible. I am proud of our contributors. I feel like our content has just continued to improve. And over the last few months, we've had some really incredible content come out on everything from AI to assisted suicide to where we go for assurance of salvation. So make sure that you check out our daily online articles. There's one every day of the week, and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss what's coming out at 1517. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back here in a couple weeks with our next guest.